Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be with you here, and it's really difficult to speak after Joachim and Tom. But let me start with saying that for us at FAO, we use agri-food system. I want to make sure that we don't disconnect food from agriculture. Agriculture is very large in our definition. It includes plant, animal, fisheries, forestries. And I hope really that we adopt the agri-food system because agriculture is very important, but also because there is also production of commodities that does not go in food. The easy one is cotton, for example. So it's just a note, but I agree with many of the things that both Joachim and Tom brought forward. And my talk, we're gonna much more address what are we doing at FAO to move towards sustainable agri-food system and to think in a system approach instead of moving as we did earlier on commodity-based and other bases. So I think we all know that even before COVID, we were not on track to end hunger. And I think really the slides from both Joachim and Tom gave us a bit of history of how far we went. And yes, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of percentage, we have reduced hunger. But it is really unacceptable that in 2022, that we have still 811 million people that are under poverty. And when we think about it, the reason why we are where we are, it's really very complex. A lot of it has to do with the climate variability. A lot of it has to do with economic slowdown and downturn. We got conflict, and we got the affordability of the healthy diet that Joachim showed us really, the slide that showcased, is that the cost we are paying, it's much, much less than the true cost of food. So just to clarify the numbers from the latest so far. So from the latest so far, what we know is that really the numbers are not doing well. So, and we have also the numbers for next year. This is the numbers in 2020, and the numbers in 2021 going to be even worse with the crisis in Ukraine. So it is a little bit very, very touchy to know that we have still 3 billion people that are unable to afford a healthy diet. It is really unacceptable when you look at the children's 75 million stunting, 26 million wasting, 39 million overweight. And what is really hurting is to know that even when they grow a little bit and we give them food, it's too late. They are not developing to their full potential. And that's where, yes, in the numbers, in the grand scheme of things, we have only about 9% of us that are in this situation, but it's unacceptable looking at the abundance that we have on planet Earth. So we cannot anymore afford to look to the other way. We have huge issues to deal with, from deforestation to soil degradation to biodiversity loss to water scarcity, overfishing. So and all of them, they are interconnected. So every one of them affect the other side. Yes, you could say that in deforestation, we are reducing dramatically our deforestation. We are also rehabilitating and bringing new forests, but it's not the same. So you can't compare a tree that is 10 years old with a tree that is 300, 400 years old. So we have really to keep in mind that it's not one against another. And the climate is changing, and I think colleagues have really touched up on it. This is a reality, it is happening. IPCC, it's one of the best science policy interfaces. It had to need the society in it, but it really gave us a huge data that really show us finally how are we as a human affecting the climate. There are other issues around biodiversity loss. So biodiversity, again, in the grand scheme of things, the numbers might have been better, might have we have less impact than in the past, but again, in the grand scheme of things, we are still harming a lot of species. And also, we don't know all of it. So when we talk about the oceans biodiversity, when we talk about the underground biodiversity. So we know that they are there, we have estimate numbers, but there is a lot to be discovered, and that's where I think science is very important. If you look about fermentation, for example, microorganisms for fermentation, we are using about 2 species, whereas there is millions of species out there. And I want to just show you this graph of biodiversity under soil, and recognizing that although we are talking about agriculture in vertical farming and what have you, more than 90% of the production right now in terms of plant, it's done on soil. And on that soil, there is a huge interactions. When we talk about synergies, we talk about interconnectedness, looking at the underground microorganisms and how they are affecting production, and that production, it's affecting the herbivores and then affecting the food chain. It's immense. And we need really to go back to that. We need to really showcase how by going back to what Joachim would call bioeconomy or biological economy and looking at all the organisms and using them at their best, we could really do far better. COVID-19 impact has been covered very well with my colleagues, but really it showed us really a huge disruption to the supply chain. And it shows us also the inefficiencies we have in the supply chain. So if you talk to WTO, it will tell you that every product crossed the border at least twice. So it doesn't make sense. If we look into the true cost of food, the environmental cost of food that Joachim showed you, it doesn't make sense. Things should not be moving around and around and around without accountability. So the UN, the science, the importance of science and innovation, I think, came very clear last year. The UN Food System Summit, Joachim and Tom talked about it, but we got also a huge call for science and innovation at the COP26. We got a huge call at the biodiversity, the COP15, but also at Tokyo Nutrition for Growth Summit in 2021. So in addition to the call for a system lens for the agri-food system, we got also a huge call worldwide for science and innovation. And that's where it's very important that I see that Airline has a Food Vision 2030 and see many of the scientists in this room. So definitely, we all agree that science is needed. But different regions will need to address different problems at their own context. So context specificity when we talk about production system, context specificity when we talk about science policy, it's very important. So, but all of them, we need science. All of them, we need data. All of them, we need really much more details when we talk about science. And that's where I want to really give a bit of a positive spin to it. It's that lately we have seen incremental and incredible speed of development. If we look at what happened in the last 5 years, for example, in AI and quantum science, it allows us really to use artificial intelligence. If we look at what happened in nanotechnology in the last few years, it's amazing. We're going at a level that we never dreamt of when you look at omics technologies. So for a few years, we were very excited about genomics, but now we are in the expression of the gene, in regulating different things, in understanding the pathways. So we are at our best time to innovate because the know-how is here. Because finally, we got in depth in many sectors that were very difficult, like quantum, like omics, like levels. So we are at the best time to use science and innovation to transform our agri-food system. And that's really the focus of FAO Science Strategic Framework for 2231. And the narrative we have in our new strategic framework for the next decade is that we need to transform our agri-food system so that they become more efficient, more sustainable, more inclusive, and more resilient. And to do so, we want to create a world with a better production, with a better nutrition, a better environment, and better life. And you could clearly say how science and innovation can help us to produce better. Could we produce more with less through science and innovation? And you could clearly see, again, science and innovation as the basis for a better nutrition. So for the longest time, we were talking about quantity, but now we're talking about quality and nutrient. Same thing for the better environment. Could we transform our agri-food system to sequester more and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And the better life, it's the livelihood of the farmers. So the graph that you showed, Tom, on the prices going down, unfortunately, those prices going down maybe are better for the consumer, but definitely not for the farmers. And anyhow, even in the times where the price goes up, it's not the farmers that get it back, it's the middlemen. So the strategy, all of it, it's really around how could we really create those four betters using science and innovation and focusing on the system level. So within that, clearly science and innovation cut across everything we do at FAO. And FAO, by the way, it's a technical agency that was created 76 years ago. And although it has a political sphere to play in, it has been always technical. And that's why all our divisions are mostly technical and dealing with different sectors. So now in the new strategic framework, we want to make sure that science and innovation, it's cutting across all of it. And we are using 4 accelerators for our strategic framework: technology, innovation, data, and complement. And under complement, it means government, human capital, institution. But what we are saying again, science is needed for everything. Science is needed for technology, it's needed for innovation, it's needed for data, but also it's needed for us to understand the complement. And that's why we are, right after the strategic framework was approved, we start developing our science and innovation strategy. And the purpose of developing the strategy is to really strengthen the use of science and innovation in all FAO technical intervention and normative guidance, such as standards and what have you, and also serves as a key tool for the implementation of the strategic framework. So as I'm discussing it right now with the 194 members of FAO, we're telling them it's not really stripped from the strategic framework. It's exactly what you need at science and innovation and partnership with it to really deliver on the strategic framework. And the goal of our strategy is that members harness science and innovation to realize a context-specific and systemic solution for more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food system. So it's really very nice to see Ireland, which is a very high agriculture country, having a vision 2030 that I see is very well aligned with the strategic framework. And of course, for us, this all goes under the Global Development Agenda 2030. So everything we do is to support the strategic framework, and we are custodian of 24 indicators in the SDGs. So the pillars we have right now for the strategy is to support innovation and technology at a regional and country level. The second one is to strengthen science and evidence-based decision-making globally, regionally, and locally, and to serve the members better by reinforcing our own capacity. And we have 2 cross-cutting pillars, which are transformative partnership and innovative funding and financing. One of the areas that we are working on, it's really looking a bit beyond in the future to the 20 or 3 horizon to 30 years, and look how could we use foresight to really streamline the use of science and innovation. And I'll give you an example. The example is that many of the technologies, when they mature in the medical area, they are used most of the time, because there is a process that takes through. There is the ethical discussion that are taking place while the technology is developed. In agriculture, unfortunately, many of the technologies became debatable once they are ready, like the gene editing right now. So we start discussing it now, whereas it's already mature, it's already in the market. And by the way, the losers are the least income countries, because right now gene editing is debated in Europe, and it's used by all universities for research purposes. But you go into Africa, and most of them, they don't use it because they are afraid that it's going to jeopardize their commerce or their trade with Europe. So the losers are always the least income countries. So the ideas of this foresight, it's really to look ahead and make sure that we understand what technologies are coming in the future, and make sure we have the right policies, the right regulation, the right investment for it, so that we harness it and we use it particularly properly. So the study that we are doing on the foresight is what breakthroughs in technology and innovation are expected in the next 30 years. that can really contribute toward achieving agri-food system transformation, how important they are, and how could we make sure that their context-specific impact is lessened or that the advantage is multiplied. How can foresight enable the identification of the synergies and the trades-off within the agri-food system? And what is the role of foresight in informing policymakers, and particularly investment? And I give the example of gene editing because it is a very important technology that could make a difference, and that's why they got the Nobel Prize last year. So the idea with that, with the foresight, what we want to really do more at FAO, it's what we call science communication around contentious issues. So contentious issues always existed, from very basic technologies to very advanced technologies. And the idea for us is really not to be for or against any technology, but rather to play the role of FAO, which is the knowledge house, to tell people what do we know about the technology, what we don't know, and what's the unknown unknown, or the known unknown at least. The unknown unknown, it's another area. So for us, for the gene editing, what we are doing is developing a paper with a number of scientists to look at the technology, the potential, the application, the ethical issues, the adaptation issues, you name it. But at least we have a reference paper from an organization like FAO that has no stake in it, that is completely independent and completely arm's length from the technology per se. And the idea is that we have a series of papers on every year on contentious issues to clarify the issues, particularly for the policymakers and for the consumers, and again, for investment. Joachim mentioned the Science Days we did last year with the UN Food System Summit. It was very successful. As he mentioned, we had about 3,000 people. It was very much appreciated by particularly not only the scientific community, but the global community, because it was the first time we are talking at the system level, agri-food. So this year, we are organizing the Science and Innovation Days, again, for about a week. And the idea is to really to bring all the scientists together around the agriculture, very large definition, to explore scientific and technological advance, to analyze what are the options for science and evidence-based decision-making, to share, support countries in making informed decisions, and particularly promote effective science communication, and pushing for more investment in science and innovation. Among the things that we have to recognize we have not really grappled or understand it very well, it's really how some technologies are scaled up and some technologies completely disappear. And I always say private sector is the only one that is doing it very well. Private sector have a very mature cycle whereby they start by an idea and really ended up by a product. And I know OECD, it's covering very well the OECD country in understanding what's happening in OECD member state, whereby who are the knowledge generator and who are the innovators. So what we are trying to do is to expand a little bit that understanding in the South. So we are developing an outlook called Agri-Food System Technology and Innovation Outlook, and it is mostly to better understand the level of the uptake of new and innovative technologies in the agri-food system at large in all countries. And the idea is that really by understanding how it happens, we will really push much more for adoption and scalability of innovation. Because technology per se, it's not enough. You need the policy side, you need the finance, you need the awareness, you need the society to come along. So the idea of the outlook is going to be an annual outlook. We're going to launch the first one in October during the Science and Innovation Days. And we would like really to do it on an annual basis to really praise the countries that have the right system for innovation to be scaled up and understand how it's happening. If you look at Africa, there is very little innovation, not only the technological innovation, but also the financial, the societal. So I'm talking at the small scale farmers level. You got the private sector, the large private sector are doing very well, but not at the small scale. So the idea of the attitude is to understand it and then push for more, for provide a system that works well at the least income countries, and recognize it, study it very well, and use it to accelerate the agri-food system transformation. We also developed at FAO a new strategy on private sector because we recognize that the funding, it's mostly within the private sector, but also the efficiency in many ways. The efficiency, and as I said, it's the only really sector that does it very well from an idea to the product. So engaging private sector in international development and in ending hunger is a must. We can't do without them, and we need to bring them on board, like we did very well with the civil society, I think, over the last few years, with the indigenous, as Joachim mentioned it, over the last few years. So with the private sector, and particularly with the focus on innovation, we need really to have ways and means to work well with them. And that's where, to close, I want to just stress that the storm is at its best. We are really in a very bad time in terms of global challenges, but we are also at the best time to innovate because we do have know-how that did not exist even 10 years ago. So it is very important for us to really work together and really look at the challenges, and finally that now we have a recognition worldwide of the interconnectedness of health with agriculture, with environment, and with the other sectors. So thank you very much, and really a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.